The Moon of Siegfried-7, A Tale of the Crimson Gallant, by Sean Barber. The alarm was shrill and loud and felt like a shattering force crashing against Tylonis' skull. He supposed that, in a twisted sort of way, he should be thankful for that. An alarm that didn't demand attention would, after all, be useless. But that was small comfort as he groggily opened his eyes and glared at the speaker. Pushing himself up off his mattress, the captain of the Crimson Gallant suppressed a groan and shouted across the cabin, "Chrome! What in the void is that?" The shrieking alarm dampened in volume for a minute, as the silica form's monotonous voice replied, "We have received a distress signal, Captain. We thought it best to alert you." "Yeah, well, I'm alerted," Tylonis said. "So turn it off." Chrome obliged, and the terrible noise ceased. Ty closed his eyes and felt his muscles relax a bit. "We would still like your presence on the bridge, sir." Tylonis sighed. "Noted." He lazily slid off the bed and threw on some trousers and a blue and white coat, the uniform of a Primarchial captain. Ty paused just long enough to check himself in the old mirror, a bronze-set antique from Lost Terra that stood out like a sore thumb against the modernity of the rest of the cabin. His mismatched blue and brown eyes swept over his image and noted that he had buttoned his coat wrong, and that his black hair was tangled and sprawled out all over the place. Tylonis blinked, shrugged, then ran his hand half-heartedly through his hair, and walked out of the cabin while adjusting his coat. Frankly, if his crew expected better of him at this point, then that was their problem. The door slid open, and Ty stepped out into the gray steel hallway that connected various sections of the Crimson Gallant. As far as official vessels of the Primarchy government went, his ship was on the small side. An experimental, lightweight survey vessel, meant to work on what any other vessel would consider the skeleton of a skeleton crew. Ty, Chrome, Alice, Vala, Fury, and Graxon. 6 crew members, including the captain and the hive consciousness that was technically a part of the ship itself. The last vessel Tylonis had served on had needed at least 5 times that number just to make it from one planet to another, and that in itself was unusually small. Of course, the last vessel he'd served on had also been a pirate ship. Being efficient with a small crew was generally a boon when you operated outside the law. The only reason Ty hadn't been executed when the Primarchy caught up with him was because of his familial connections, a fact that rankled him to his core. Pushing such thoughts out of his head, Tylonis walked down the Spartan hallway to the bridge of the ship. For now, at least, he needed to focus on whatever this distress signal was. Tylonis arrived on the bridge and took stock of who else was present. At the moment, it looked like it was just Chrome and Vala. "There's something vast and powerful out there," Vala said softly. Her eyes were closed, and the intricate tattoos that covered her body seemed to shimmer against her dark skin. The Star Witch opened her eyes, blue and softly glowing, and focused her attention on Tylonis. "Captain," she acknowledged. He nodded at her, then looked at Chrome. The silica form had assumed their usual appearance as a roughly humanoid-shaped mannequin-like figure. They had turned the smooth surface of their head so that the part where a face would usually go was directed at Tylonis. "What do we know?" Ty asked. "It appears to be an elf signal," Chrome replied. "It is a generic distress signal, with no specific information about their situation. The signal is intermittent and fluctuates in strength. We believe the one sending it may be using damaged equipment." Tylonis nodded. Chrome, like all silica forms, was a hive of individual consciousnesses that formed together into a singular body. If Chrome told him they believed something, that meant that multiple computer-like intelligences had arrived at a consensus based on the data they had perceived. Consequently, Ty had learned to trust any statement that Chrome prefaced with, "We believe." "And what's this about something vast and powerful?" he asked Vala. She shook her head, an action that caused her myriad dreadlocks to swing around her. Usually Vala wore her hair tied back, so Ty assumed that he wasn't the only one who'd been suddenly awakened and had to rush to the bridge. The fact that her gray-blue robe looked unusually disheveled supported his assumption. I'm not sure, Vala told him. I sense a presence, but I can't determine what it is. Only that it's overwhelming. Its psychic presence is so vast that it's essentially hiding anything else that might be out there. Tylanus sighed. Okay, cool. So to sum up, we have a broken distress signal from some elves, and Vala can't sense said elves because of a big scary space brain blocking her. Awesome. He walked over to the captain's chair and plopped down on it. It was a big and oddly comfortable seat in the center of the bridge, and he always felt important and confident when sitting in it. Get Fury up here. Let's see if she can tell us anything. Also Alice, in case things are dangerous. Hell, call Graxon to the bridge, too, so he doesn't feel left out. He paused and blinked. Also, get me some caffeine, please. I feel like this is going to be a whole thing. Within half an hour, they had a visual. The planet is in our database as Siegfried-7, Chrome explained. The Primarchy has had very little presence in the system, but it is not unknown to the Elven Confederation. They call the planet Tralavalon Avara. That means it's the 7th planet in the Tralavara system, Fury offered with a wry grin. She brushed back her white hair behind her pointed ears. So, basically the same naming conventions you humans use. Ty nodded, his eyes on the view screen. The planet was blue, with streaks of purple. A gas giant from the look of things. The distress signal was coming from one of the moons. What do you know about the moons? He asked. Very little, Chrome told him. The last survey vessel to pass this system recorded Siegfried-7 as having 4 moons. The vessel before that recorded 7, and before that, 6. Currently, we detect 5 moons present. Tylanus sighed. So it was a backwater planet in a backwater system, so unimportant that nobody had ever bothered to do a thorough surveillance. This just sounded great. How much space do we have in the Gallant? He asked. We have enough room to accommodate 3 more passengers comfortably, or 10 uncomfortably, Chrome told him. It would take 4 days to reach the closest port at Susano, so rations may be stretched thin depending on how many extra passengers we take on. Damn. Most vessels couldn't run with a crew as small as the Crimson Gallants. Unless something truly horrible had happened, Tylanus guessed that there were more than 10 elves down there. Standard ground team, Ty told his crew. Alice, Graxon, Fury, you're with me on the surface. Vala and Chrome, keep watch up here. Let's see about saving some elves. The Gallant had only one shuttle, which was even more cramped than the ship proper. A survey vessel didn't typically need more than a single shuttle attachment to ferry the crew to and from the surface of the planet. Ty wondered how many round trips they'd have to take to rescue any elves down here. They'd probably be at it all day. So it was with resignation in his heart that he watched the clouds of the moon give way to reveal the approaching ground. The moon looked barren, likely as a result of what Chrome and their sensors had described as a toxic and hostile atmosphere. The whole damn satellite looked to be covered in yellow dust and foothills. It's surprisingly flat, Graxon observed. The Theraloid's 3 eyes scanned over the terrain. There should be mountains, craters, seas. Instead, it's just plains and hills. Tylanus nodded. I was thinking the same thing. Nice to know the geologist agrees with me about it being weird. I see the crash site, Alice said. The demon-blooded woman pointed out the observation window, and Ty followed her finger. Sure enough, there was a crashed space vessel, a long trail of broken terrain behind it. Alice was seated at the controls, and she quickly input a few commands before guiding the shuttle in the direction of the wreckage. Helmets on, Ty ordered, and he placed his own helmet on his head, closing the visor and sealing the headpiece to his protective suit. Chrome had been very insistent in their warnings about this moon's atmosphere. As the shuttle alighted on the surface of the moon, he looked around and made sure his crew had all secured their helmets. They had. Fury was touching hers nervously, while Graxon seemed at ease. Ty suppressed a smirk when he checked Alice. Her helmet was large and oddly shaped to account for her horns. He knew it would be a poor idea to let her know how amusing he found the sight. Everyone stick together, Ty told them. Alice will take point with Fury. Fury, as our resident elf, I'm trusting you to be our interpreter if need be. Got it? She nodded, her silver eyes wide and anxious. Ty could sympathize. There was no telling what they would find inside that downed ship. The inner door opened and Ty stepped out into the airlock. Graxon, Fury, and Alice followed behind him. They stood in the airlock as the door slid shut behind them. Fury fidgeting, and Alice stoic, and Graxon looking like he didn't know what to do with his hands. Ty took a deep breath and looked to the hatch leading outside. With a hiss, the hatch opened slowly, revealing a barren landscape of dust and hills, silver clouds above indistinct and hazy. As Ty stepped out of the shuttle, he expected to feel at least the subtle push of a breeze or wind of some kind, but there was none. The moon was empty and still, and the only sound seemed to be the footsteps of Ty and his crew as their boots crunched across the yellow ground. Graxon was soon crouched, collecting a sample of the yellow dust in a small tube. A light display on the tube shifted colors, and the Theraloid examined it carefully. "This dust is organic?" he asked. Before Tylanus could ask for more details, the ground shook. He stumbled, nearly falling into Alice, but the security officer caught him and held him steady. "Seismic activity," Graxon noted. "This is a weird place." "Yeah, I noticed," Ty said dryly, pushing himself off of Alice and glancing around at his crew to make sure everyone was okay. "Let's get inside the crash site, and then get off this rock." It was about 200 meters to the wreck, the trail of the fallen elven ship a massive scar in the landscape. The wreckage of the vessel loomed over them, the usually smooth and glossy designs of the Elven Confederation now twisted and jagged. It reminded Tylanus of a spiderweb crack on a pane of glass, but in 3 dimensions, and writ larger than life. The metals of the craft stabbed into the sky as massive spikes, and the outer hull of the ship curled out like tendrils reaching into the atmosphere. And it was all utterly still, utterly quiet. No sounds of life or machinery emanated from the wreck. If not for the distress signal, Ty wouldn't have believed that there was any functionality left in the thing. "Chrome," he said into his transmitter, "we're about to enter the wreck. Communications may be blocked." "Understood, sir," Chrome replied. "We are currently repositioning the Crimson Gallant. Be advised that there is a cluster of asteroids approaching the moon. I do not project any of them will be making impact. However, projections aren't always accurate," Ty finished for them. "Got it. We'll try to be quick." Ty gestured to the wreck and stood back as Alice stepped forward. Approaching the vessel, Alice held her right hand out to her side. The air around it darkened, and a black sword materialized in the space there. She grasped its hilt and held it at the ready, inky wisps of smoke drifting off the dark metal of the blade. Ty didn't know how Alice had ended up with this weapon. She had already possessed it when he first met her, and every time he saw it again, he had to suppress a shudder. There was something wrong about it, something that gave the impression of terror and filth, of hatred and desperation, tragedy and chaos. But Ty couldn't deny that that sword, whatever it was a damn useful weapon to have on his side. There was an opening in the hull of the fallen ship, a scar that had been torn open on impact. Alice thrust her sword into the scar and then cut through the metal around it, peeling open a greater entrance into the ship beyond. Once it was large enough for a person to fit, she flicked a switch in her helmet, turning on the built-in flashlight, and climbed inside. A moment passed, and then another. Finally, Alice's voice crackled to life inside their helmets. "All clear." Ty nodded to Fury and Graxon and entered the opening after her. The rest of his crew followed, their lights illuminating a hallway that had been twisted and warped into some kind of mad, spiraling labyrinth. "Stick together," Ty ordered as Alice stepped back into view from behind a curved corner. "There seems to be a passage here that should take us up to the bridge," Alice told him, gesturing to where she just emerged from. Ty nodded and followed her lead. The passage in question was a bit more vertical than Ty would have liked. He craned his head upward and saw light emerging from someplace 500 or 600 meters above. "Everyone remember to check their thrusters before heading out, right?" There was a chorus of affirmations, so Ty didn't waste any more time. He activated the thruster rig on the back of his suit and took flight. These rigs weren't great for precision. Ty had to shift his body back and forth like he was trying to balance on a narrow pathway in order to avoid throwing himself directly into the wall. But they did the job well enough. He soared up through the ruined ship and to the source of that light, and was soon once again planting his feet on solid ground. Before him was a set of double sliding doors, built from reinforced metal that he wasn't familiar with. Something from the elf homeworlds, no doubt. One of the doors had been bent and curved outwards towards him, while the other was barely even still attached to the rest of the ship, hanging loosely and uselessly, leaving the passage beyond completely open for anyone to just waltz through. Ow! Tylanus turned his head and raised an eyebrow at Fury, who'd managed to bump the wall on her way up here. Between the darkness of the ship and the glare of their flashlights, she couldn't see his expression, nor he hers, but he liked to think that she knew what look he was giving her regardless. Sorry, she muttered, rubbing her shoulder. Beside her, Gregson and Alice had apparently been much more successful in their flights and landings. Ty nodded to Alice, and she once again took point, moving through the open doorway with her sword once again in hand. Silence followed, and then she beckoned the rest of the crew to enter. Beyond the doors was a wide circular room, lined with smashed consoles and broken screens. A chair lay on the ground near the center, the gravity rig that would have kept it suspended having been destroyed in the crash. A few of the monitors still flickered and glowed, which was the source of the light Ty had seen, but there was little else here. Well, except for the bodies. They were thrown all about the bridge. Elves, dead, their limbs splayed about in ways that limbs were never intended to. Some bled. Some were missing pieces. Others looked almost fine. It was hard to tell how many had died in the initial impact versus how many had survived only to succumb to the toxic atmosphere of the moon. "Fa Shaloni," Fury whispered as she entered the bridge. I don't think anyone is left alive." "It's a big ship," Ty told her, doing his level best to ignore the corpses. "There may be someone somewhere. Gregson, you have the gizmo, right?" "Dongle, sir," Gregson said. He walked to one of the consoles and plugged a small device into it. Immediately, Chrome's voice filled their helmets. "We are inside the vessel," they said. "Scanning for life now." Ty nodded to Fury. "With the state the ship is in," he began. She understood. "We should scan as well." The two of them closed their eyes and reached out their awarenesses, seeking the spirits that inhabited this place. There were spirits all over the universe, inhabiting all that there was save for the void. As an elf, Fury had a natural affinity for astralpathy, the ability to find and communicate with these spirits. And as a human-elf hybrid, grown in one of the Primarchy's top-secret labs back on the Lunar Citadel, Tylanus was an even more powerful astralpath. What he found when he reached out was death. Spirits of loss and decay filled this ship. They completely overwhelmed the vessel, filling it with their presence and their essence. There was nobody alive here. But there was someone alive out there. Something alive out there. "Sir, do you feel that?" Fury asked. Yeah, how could he not? The spirits of life that inhabited the moon were overwhelming in their numbers and vastness. They nearly drowned out all the spirits of death that filled the ship. How? The moon had seemed so barren and lifeless. He opened his eyes just as another tremor took the ship. Something creaked and broke somewhere else in the vessel. "No," Fury gasped. "This is Vodrali Tehran." "Oh, it's what?" Ty asked her. Fury spun on him. "We need to leave," she said, her voice rising to the edge of panic. "We need to get out of here and get back to the Crimson Gallant and leave this system right now." The rest of them stared at her. Alice held her sword at the ready and looked about as if expecting an attack from any direction. "Why?" Ty asked. "No life signs detected," Chrome interjected. "There are life signs!" Fury cried. "Vodrola! This is a Vodrola!" "Fury," Alice said evenly, "we don't know what that is." "What is so special about this moon?" Ty asked. Another tremor. It was smaller than the others, but there was less of a break between this one and the last. Fury looked at him, and through the helmets he saw the determination and fear and wonder in her eyes. "That's the thing, sir," she said. "This is not a moon." Then what is it? Fury was already heading back the way they came, ducking under the ruined doors to return to the vertical passage. Vadroli Tehran, she said. It's an egg. Tylanus, Graxon, and Alice all exchanged glances and followed after her. Fury had already activated her thrusters and started descending the passage. As they too descended, there was yet another tremor, and the ship shook violently around them. With a loud metallic groan, a piece of ship suddenly tore itself out of the wall above them, slamming into the opposite wall and falling. "Incoming!" Ty screamed. Everyone threw themselves to the side, slamming into the walls of the passage and sliding downward as the debris fell past them. When they reached the ground, there was yet another violent tremor, and the small crew began running back through the hallway, back to the opening they'd come through. "It's hatching!" Fury cried. "Oh, Shalona, it's hatching!" "What's hatching?" Ty shouted, but his voice was drowned out by a grinding roar. The ship was falling apart around them, collapsing in on itself as the ground shook. Ahead of him, he saw Graxon dive through the opening, out onto the yellow plains beyond. Fury was soon out behind him. Ty ran as hard as he could, but suddenly he heard a deafening grinding and his foot caught on something. His eyes went down to his foot as he fell forward, just barely managing to get his arms in front of him to keep himself from smashing his helmet visor against the floor. The metal below him had torn open and a piece had been pushed upward by the tremors. Heart pounding, Ty attempted to scramble back to his feet and continue running. Another tremor. He had to stop moving and focus on not falling back down. Damn it, damn it, damn it! He needed to get out of this shipwreck before the whole thing fell on top of him. Suddenly a hand grabbed his arm and pulled him to his feet. Tylanus was just barely able to shout a thank you at Alice's weirdly shaped helmet before she was running forward and dragging him along. Together they jumped through the exit just as another metallic screech filled the air. Alice let go of his arm, and Ty stumbled as his feet hit the ground. His security officer was already running toward the shuttle, and Tylanus wasted no time in following after her. Another screech, another pained groaning grinding. He resisted the impulse to turn his head and look at what was happening to the elven ship. Instead, he concentrated on running as fast as his legs could carry him. And then he was at the shuttle, stumbling into the airlock just as another tremor shook the ground. As soon as he was in, Alice slammed her fist into the button on the wall, and the door slid shut behind him. There was a violent hissing as all the air inside the chamber was sucked out, and then the door to the shuttle slid open. Ty and his crew rushed in, barely able to keep their balance on the shuddering floor, and took up their positions. "Chrome, we're on the shuttle," Ty barked into the comm as Alice took her place in the pilot seat. "Get us the hell out of here!" The shuttle came to life with a violent shake, and Ty had to grab onto a handbar on the wall to keep from falling flat on his ass. As the craft began to move, he threw his body into his seat and strapped himself down. He pulled his helmet off. "Hey, Fury?" he asked. "You mind telling me just what's going on?" "Vadroli Tehran," Fury told him, taking off her helmet and raising her voice above the rumbling all around them. "The egg of the Vadrola. I never thought I'd see one. They're extremely rare, to the point that some don't even believe they exist. But, Captain, that's why the record of moons for this planet was so inconsistent. They were never moons. This is a spawning ground." The shuttle shook violently as it climbed into the atmosphere. Ty had to hold off on asking her to clarify for fear of accidentally biting into his tongue. With a final lurch, the little shuttle burst through the hazy clouds and emerged into the vacuum of space. And there was the Crimson Gallant, a red speck from here, but fast approaching. Ty opened his mouth to ask Fury more questions. "Incoming!" Alice shouted. The shuttle swerved, spinning upside down to avoid a chunk of asteroid that suddenly sailed past it. Ty silently thanked heaven that there wasn't any gravity up here, or else he might have thrown up from the maneuver. Another asteroid flew toward them, and Alice jerked the shuttle to the side, narrowly avoiding collision with the chunk of rock. As it flew past, Ty saw that it had a distinctly yellowish hue. "Shells of another egg," Fury said. "That ship must have been hit by the debris of it hatching. That's what caused it to crash." "Most of the debris probably falls down to the planet," Graxon observed. "But what doesn't would continue orbiting, like these." "So what exactly is a Vadrola?" Ty asked. "Massive creatures capable of surviving the void, that feed on the energy of the cosmos," Fury told him. "Some of my people worship them, call them children of the infinite. They appear in almost every mythology in the universe, as they have traveled close enough to many planets to be seen. Terra is no exception." But what is it? Fury looked out the observation window. I think you'll see for yourself in a few minutes, Captain. Ty followed her gaze, and sure enough, there were massive fissures spreading across the moon that they had just been standing on. The haze of the atmosphere was beginning to dissipate, like a cloud spreading out off of the rock. Stand by for docking, Chrome's voice suddenly declared over the speakers. Not long after, Ty stood on the bridge. The Crimson Gallant was maintaining a safe distance from the egg, the Vidroli Tehran. Chrome kept their eye on the debris flying about in the void out there, and kept the ship clear of any projected asteroid paths. The haze was gone completely from the egg, and the fissures were growing in size, spreading out, chunks of rock breaking away and spinning off into orbit around Siegfried-7. And then, all at once, the satellite came apart. The shell tore in an explosion of rock and dust. Pieces began falling down into the gas giant below, glowing with the fires of atmospheric entry, all while others settled into an orbital path. And the whole crew of the Crimson Gallant watched as the Vidrola spread its wings. There were 4, each impossibly wide and yet strangely thin. The wings caught the light of the system's sun in a glowing rainbow pattern, and as the Vidrola spread them, Ty found himself gaping in rapt awe at the vibrant colors before him. The body of the creature was white and vaguely reptilian. Aside from the 4 wings, it was almost serpentine, a miles-long tail uncurling behind it as the last of the egg broke away. And at the end of the creature's massive neck was a scaled head, crested with a white bony structure that seemed to protect its 4 huge black eyes and its wide mouth. The head was angular and lizard-like, and the Vidrola looked back and forth. Ty swore that it saw the ship, that it looked directly through the ship and saw all within it, that its eyes, for the briefest of instants, were focused directly on him. But then its gaze swept past the Crimson Gallant, and he had the distinct impression that the beast had dismissed them as unimportant. It was an impossible creature, an utterly alien creature, and yet it was a familiar one. Ty knew as soon as he saw it what name his ancestors may have used, looking up at the night sky and seeing this creature sail past their little blue planet. "It's a dragon," Ty whispered. Those were the only words spoken as the crew of the Crimson Gallant watched the dragon stretch its wings out until it seemed it could encompass the entirety of the void. No sound could travel in the vacuum of space, but nonetheless Ty could almost hear the jubilant cry of life that the newborn must have given, echoing in his mind. The dragon took flight. It flew out of the debris created by its hatching, out of the orbit of Siegfried-7, and into the vastness of the infinite. It flew, and Ty was struck by the thought that this creature was but an infant, that it would one day grow into something even more incomprehensibly huge, something capable of laying an egg the size of a moon. But that day was far off, for now the dragon soared, beginning its new life and its journey through the infinite universe. Thank you for listening to The Moon of Siegfried-7. If you enjoyed this story, then why not like and subscribe, click the little bell. This story was originally a Patreon exclusive story, so if you want to see more stories about the Crimson Gallant universe, then head on over to my Patreon at patreon.com/SeanWrightStuff. That's Sean as in SEANN, 2 N's, Right Stuff. See you around.